My name is Olivia. I'm 28 years old, and for 10 years, my aunt and uncle treated me like a disposable employee in the company my own father built. I was kept close enough to serve, but never close enough to count. I kept telling myself that if I just kept my head down, they'd finally respect me as family. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came at a crowded downtown bistro last Tuesday. My aunt invited me to lunch just to demand I surrender my remaining business shares. Your uncle built this trademark, she glared, sliding a thick legal folder across the table. You owe us. She threatened to sue me for $658,000 and bankrupt me if I refused to sign. 40 people in that restaurant heard her voice echo over the jazz music. The waiter at the next table froze, a glass water pitcher suspended in his hand. I did the late shifts. They took the bonuses. I designed the branding. They put their names on the door. I thought I was earning my rightful place. I was wrong. But my aunt had no idea what I had been quietly backing up for the last 6 months. I didn't argue with her. I just placed a silver flash drive directly onto her porcelain plate. What was on that drive wasn't just going to stop her lawsuit. It was about to tear open years of financial lies and strip them of their reputation and control entirely. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. The clock on the office wall said 1:15 a.m. It was that heavy, hollow kind of silence you only find in commercial buildings late at night, just the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional groan of the elevator shafts. I sat at my desk, my eyes burning from the blue light of the dual monitors. This wasn't just another project. This was the Horizon branding campaign. It was $1 million contract, the kind my father used to land twice a year back when the company was still truly ours. My back ached. I'd been in this chair since 8:00 a.m. the previous morning. My Aunt Catherine had made it clear that if this pitch wasn't perfect by dawn, the family legacy would be on my head. That was her favorite phrase. She used it like a blunt instrument whenever she wanted me to skip a meal or work through a weekend. To her, the family legacy was a debt I was born into, a bill that never quite got paid off no matter how many hours I logged. I adjusted the kerning on the secondary logo. I was the lead designer, technically, but my paycheck looked like a junior intern's. When my father died 10 years ago, Uncle Gerald and Aunt Catherine stepped in as protectors. They told me I was too young, too grief-stricken, and too inexperienced to handle the shares. They promised to hold the reins until I was ready. 10 years later, I was still sitting in the same cubicle, while they occupied the corner offices with the mahogany desks my father had picked out himself. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard the soft scuff of shoes on the industrial carpet. I didn't turn around. I assumed it was the night security guard making his rounds. You're still at it, Olivia. I spun my chair. It was Marcus. He was 68, with hair the color of static and a permanent slouch from 40 years of leaning over ledgers. He had been my father's chief accountant, the man who knew where every cent lived. Since the takeover, as I secretly called it, he had been sidelined to a back office, kept around mostly because he knew the old filing systems better than anyone else. I have to finish this, Marcus, I said, rubbing my face. Catherine said if we lose Horizon, we might have to downsize the design department. Which means me. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He walked over to the break room corner and a minute later he returned with a heavy ceramic mug. The steam smelled like hazelnut, my father's favorite. He set it down next to my tablet. Drink, he said quietly. I took a sip. It was hot and far better than the sludge from the communal pot. Marcus leaned in, squinting at my screen. He looked at the bold lines of the branding, the way I'd woven the heritage of the company into a modern, minimalist aesthetic. It was good work. I knew it was good. You definitely have his touch, Marcus whispered. His voice was thick. The way you use the negative space, he would be proud of you, Olivia, truly. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was the first time anyone in that building had mentioned my father's pride in years. At the Sunday dinners I was forced to attend at my aunt's house, my father was usually brought up as a cautionary tale, a man who was too soft for business, a man whose mess Catherine and Gerald had been forced to clean up. They don't see it, I said, my voice cracking slightly. They just see a pair of hands to do the work. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was surprisingly steady. I see it, and I'm not the only one who remembers how this company is supposed to run. He stood there for a moment longer, a silent witness to the glow of my monitors, before turning to head back toward the elevators. I watched him go, feeling a strange flicker of warmth that the coffee couldn't provide. I wasn't completely alone in this building. I worked until 5:00 a.m. I polished the pitch decks, rendered the 3D mock-ups, and printed the high-gloss boards for the morning presentation. I went to the office bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and changed into a fresh blazer I kept in my locker. I looked like a professional. I felt like a ghost. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the boardroom doors opened. I stood by the easel, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was my work, my vision. I had stayed up for 40 hours to ensure the company's survival. Uncle Gerald walked in first, smelling of expensive aftershave and peppermint. Aunt Catherine followed, her heels clicking like a metronome on the hardwood. They didn't look at me. They didn't ask if I'd slept. The boards look acceptable, Catherine said, barely glancing at the centerpiece I'd spent 6 hours perfecting. She turned to Gerald. Did you bring the signature pen? Right here, Gerald said, patting his breast pocket. He gave me a small, tight smile, the kind you give a waiter who just brought the wrong order. The clients arrived 5 minutes later. They were impressed. I could see it in their eyes as they moved from board to board. I stepped forward to begin the walkthrough, to explain the color theory and the brand's new voice. Thank you, Olivia, Catherine interrupted, her voice like a velvet curtain dropping. She stepped directly in front of me, forcing me to take a step back into the shadows of the corner. My husband and I have spent months developing this direction. Gerald, why don't you walk our guests through the strategy we finalized last night? I stood there, my hands trembling behind my back. I watched my uncle point to my sketches. I heard him use my words, my metaphors, my research. He spoke as if he had spent weeks agonizing over the font choice I had settled on at 3:00 a.m. while he was asleep in his silk sheets. When it came time to sign the preliminary contract, Gerald pulled out a heavy gold pen. He signed his name with a flourish at the bottom of a project he hadn't contributed a single hour to. Catherine stood beside him, beaming, looking like the architect of a masterpiece. I was just the person who would have to stay late to clean up the coffee cups. I thought that if I worked even harder, they would finally recognize me as an equal. I thought there was a ceiling I could break through if I just showed enough loyalty. But as I watched them shake hands with the Horizon executives, I realized I wasn't looking at a ceiling. I was looking at a cage. But then came the day of the presentation that changed everything. The high of the Horizon success lasted exactly 48 hours. By Thursday, the office felt different. The air was thin, the way it gets before a storm. I was back at my desk, drafting the secondary assets for the campaign, when I realized my name hadn't appeared on a single official email thread regarding the project's execution. I was the one who had stayed up for 2 days straight, but on paper, I didn't exist. I decided I couldn't let it go this time. 10 years of playing the grateful niece had got me a basement cubicle and a salary that barely covered my rent. I walked up to the 3rd floor. My heart was thumping against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise. I knocked on Uncle Gerald's door. He was leaning back in his chair, staring at a golf magazine. Aunt Catherine was there too, standing by the window with her arms crossed. Uncle Gerald, Aunt Catherine, I started, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm happy the Horizon pitch went well, but I noticed my name was left off the filing for the creative lead credit. Since the entire visual identity was my work, I'd like to be officially listed on the pitch deck for the investors next week. The silence that followed was heavy. Gerald didn't look up from his magazine. Catherine didn't move from the window. Listed? Catherine finally asked. She turned slowly. Her eyes were like chips of flint. Olivia, we are the principals of this firm. You are a junior designer. Your work is simply an extension of the family brand we've spent a decade protecting. It's more than that, I said. I did the research, I did the execution. If we're going to be partners one day, Catherine laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. It was sharp and dismissive, the kind of laugh that makes you feel 6 inches tall. Partners? She stepped toward me. Olivia, sweetheart, you are here because we took you in when you were a mess. We saved your father's company from ruin. You should be grateful we even let you play with the software. You haven't grown up yet. You're still that same emotional girl who couldn't handle a simple funeral. I handle every project in this building, I countered. You handle what we give you, she snapped. And since you're so worried about credit, let's talk about costs. Your little outburst just cost you your quarterly bonus. Consider it a fee for the mentorship we provide. I looked at Gerald. He finally looked up, but he didn't defend me. He just sighed, a weary, performative sound. Don't make this difficult, Olivia. Your aunt does so much for you. Go back to your desk. The damage didn't stop there. An hour later, 2 facilities guys showed up at my cubicle. They didn't say anything, they just started putting my monitors into crates. What are you doing? I asked, standing up. Orders from Mrs. Sterling, the taller one said, not looking me in the eye. We're moving the design overflow to the storage level. They need this space for the new account managers. The storage level was the basement. It was a windowless room next to the server racks that smelled of ozone and damp cardboard. By noon, my life was packed into 2 boxes. I was no longer in the heart of the company my father built. I was being buried in the foundation. I walked past Marcus on my way to the freight elevator. He was standing by the copier, holding a stack of invoices. He saw the boxes. He saw the red rim around my eyes. He looked down quickly, his knuckles white as he gripped the paper. He couldn't help me, not yet. He was just as much a prisoner of their generosity as I was. I sat in my new office in the basement, the hum of the servers vibrating through my chair. This was the first real crack. They weren't just taking my work anymore, they were taking my dignity. They wanted me invisible. I took out my phone and sent a text to my uncle. Uncle Gerald, please. I know you know how much I do here. I'm in the basement. This isn't right. I waited 10 minutes, 20. When the phone finally buzzed, it wasn't a message of support. It was a notification from the company portal. My access to the Horizon project files had been restricted to read-only. This wasn't an accident. They were intentionally keeping me in the shadows. The basement was worse than I expected. It wasn't just the lack of windows, it was the isolation. In the main office, I could at least hear the hum of productivity, the collaborative energy that used to remind me of my father. Down here, it was just me and the industrial cooling fans. I decided that if they wouldn't give me a seat at the table, I would build my own. I still had the contact info for 3 of our mid-sized clients, people who had worked with my father for years and liked my design style. I spent my lunch breaks and late nights drafting pitch decks for a new boutique direction. I didn't use the company logo. I used my own name. I sent them out on Friday afternoon, bypassing Catherine's approval queue entirely. I thought it was a brave move. I thought it was the start of my independence. Monday morning, I didn't even make it to my basement desk. Aunt Catherine was waiting for me in the lobby, standing next to the security desk. She looked immaculate in a sharp gray suit, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She held her phone out like it was a piece of evidence. "One of our clients was very confused this morning, Olivia," she said. Her voice was low, vibrating with a controlled rage. "They received an independent proposal from a junior staffer. They wanted to know if Sterling and Associates was having a management crisis. I was just showing them a different direction for their rebranding," I said, though my throat felt tight. "They've been unhappy with the generic templates Gerald's team has been pushing." "You were stealing," Catherine hissed. "You were using our resources, our client list, and our time to solicit business behind our back." "It's my father's client list," I reminded her. That was the wrong thing to say. Catherine stepped into my personal space. "Your father is dead and his company would be a parking lot if we hadn't stepped in. You want to play at being a CEO? Fine. Let's see how you handle the consequences." By noon, the retaliation was systematic. First, I was blocked from the company's internal server. Not just the Horizon project, everything. 10 years of my portfolio, my drafts, my research notes, all of it was suddenly behind a password I no longer possessed. Then came the email. Catherine sent a BCC to every employee in the firm. It didn't mention the clients. Instead, it was a health update. It stated that due to recent erratic behavior and ongoing emotional struggles related to family loss, I would be taking a step back from all client-facing roles. It was phrased with a sickening, faux-concerned tone. She was telling everyone I was having a mental breakdown. I went to Gerald's office, desperate. "Uncle Gerald, you have to stop her. She's telling people I'm unstable. I can't work if the clients think I'm losing my mind." Gerald didn't even look up from his desk. He was signing a stack of checks. "Don't upset your aunt, Olivia. She does so much for you. She's just trying to protect the firm's reputation. If you're acting out, maybe you do need a break." "I'm not acting out, I'm doing the work." "Go home," he said, his voice flat. "Take a few days, clear your head, we'll talk when you're less hysterical." I walked out of his office and past the design floor. My former colleagues, people I'd grabbed drinks with, people I'd helped with their own deadlines, looked away. They stared at their screens or studied their cuticles. The rumor had already taken root. I wasn't the lead designer anymore. I was the troubled niece they had to tolerate out of pity. When I got to my car, I checked my bank app. My direct deposit for the month had been reversed. A note in the portal said my pay was being withheld pending a full audit of company equipment use. They weren't just punishing me, they were starving me out. They wanted me to come crawling back, begging for a paycheck and an apology. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel until the leather blurred. I had lost my portfolio, my reputation, and my income in the span of 4 hours. That was the first time I realized they didn't just want my work. They wanted me erased. I spent the next 3 hours sitting in my car in the far corner of the office parking lot. It was barely 3 in the afternoon, but the sky had bruised into a deep, heavy gray. Then the rain started. It wasn't a gentle mist. It was a torrential downpour that turned the world outside my windshield into a blurred, gray smear. The sound of the water drumming on the roof was the only thing I could hear. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. For 10 years, I had been the first one in and the last one out. I had missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and worked through bouts of the flu, all to prove I was worthy of the name on the door. And in a single morning, they had wiped it all away. I had no money, no digital portfolio to show a new employer, and a reputation that my own aunt was currently dismantling with every phone call she made. I felt hollow. It wasn't just the loss of the job. It was the realization that the people I called family had been waiting for a reason to discard me. I was 28 years old, and I was starting from less than zero. I leaned my head against the steering wheel and finally let the sobs come. I cried for my father, for the company he loved, and for the decade I'd wasted trying to earn love from people who only valued leverage. I was ready to give up. I thought about driving away, not to a new life, but just away. A sharp rap on the passenger side window made me jump. I looked over, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Marcus was standing there, his cheap windbreaker soaked through, his thin hair plastered to his forehead. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. I unlocked the door and he climbed in, bringing the scent of wet wool and old paper with him. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "It will be okay." He knew better than that. Instead, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. He placed it on my lap. "I took this from your father's desk the day they signed everything over to themselves," he said, his voice gravelly. "I've been keeping it in my floorboard safe for 10 years. I was waiting for the moment you realized they weren't going to give you what was already yours." I opened the box. Inside was a heavy, silver-capped fountain pen, my father's pen, the one he used to sign every major contract, the one he said carried the weight of a man's word. It felt cold and solid in my hand. "He would never have given up, Olivia," Marcus whispered, looking straight through the rain-streaked windshield. "And he didn't leave the company to them willingly." I saw the original ledgers before Catherine reorganized the filing room. I clutched the pen so hard the metal bit into my palm. The coldness of it felt like a wake-up call. I wasn't just a designer they could fire. I was his daughter. I wiped my tears and looked at Marcus. "What did you see, Marcus?" "Enough to know they've been lying since the day of the funeral," he said. I gripped the pen. If they wanted a war, I finally had the one thing they couldn't take, a witness. The rumors moved faster than I could drive. By the time I reached my apartment, the contagion had already infected every corner of my life. My phone started buzzing with notifications from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. It wasn't support. It was a series of digital check-ins that felt more like interrogations. Aunt Catherine wasn't just telling the office I was unstable. She was calling every old partner of my father's, every cousin, and every family friend. The narrative was always the same. Olivia is struggling. She's becoming aggressive. We're so worried she's going to destroy the family business out of pure jealousy. On Saturday, I found out just how far the lie had traveled. I received an automated notification from the country club where the annual Sterling and Associates corporate banquet was being held. Usually, as a member of the family, I was on the planning committee. This time, I hadn't even received a formal invite. I was just an entry on a seating chart. I decided to go. Not because I wanted the rubbery chicken or the polite small talk, but because if I stayed hidden, I was giving Catherine the silence she needed to finish me off. I pulled up to the club in my 10-year-old car, parking it between a row of gleaming SUVs and German sedans. The banquet hall was a sea of crystal and white linen. The jazz band was playing something upbeat and expensive. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, the atmosphere shifted. It was like a physical weight. I walked toward the check-in desk, and the two junior associates working the clipboards immediately stopped talking. They looked at each other, then back at me, their smiles turning tight and professional, the way people look at someone who's about to cause a scene. "Name?" one of them asked, though she'd known me for 3 years. "Olivia Sterling." She looked down at her list, her finger tracing the names. "You're at table 24, Olivia." Table 24 was at the very back of the hall, tucked into a corner right next to the kitchen's swinging doors. It was the table for vendors and temporary staff. I looked toward the front of the room. Table 1, the head table, was a platform of power. Aunt Catherine sat in the center, looking like a queen in a deep emerald gown. Uncle Gerald was beside her, laughing at something an investor was saying. I walked the length of the room. I kept my chin up, but I felt every pair of eyes on me. People I had worked with for a decade suddenly found their drinks very interesting as I passed. A senior designer I'd mentored for 2 years literally turned his back to me to point at a floral arrangement. Nobody waved. Nobody pulled out a chair. I sat at table 24. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a blast of heat and the smell of dishwater hit me. I watched the room through the gaps in the crowd. At 8:00 p.m., Catherine stood up. She tapped a silver spoon against her crystal flute and the room went silent. "Tonight is about legacy," she began, her voice projected perfectly through the speakers. "It's about the strength of family and the loyalty that keeps a business standing when things get difficult." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room until it landed directly on me. She didn't look away. She smiled, a cold, arrogant expression that said, "Look what I can do to you." "We have faced challenges this year, some from within our own circle. But we remain committed to the truth and to the legacy Gerald and I have built from the ground up." The room erupted in applause. People were standing, raising their glasses to the woman who was currently strangling my father's reputation. I sat there, my hands flat on the table, watching the people I thought were my community celebrate my erasure. I looked at the kitchen doors, then back at the stage. I realized then that I had nothing left to lose. They had already taken my seat, my name, and my voice. There was no point in playing by their rules anymore. I stood up before the main course was served. I didn't head for the exit. I headed for the side door where Marcus was waiting in the shadows of the coat check. "I'm ready," I said. "I thought you might be," Marcus replied. "My car is around back. We have work to do." Marcus's apartment was the opposite of my aunt's pristine mansion. It was filled with towers of old industry magazines, the smell of burnt toast, and a heavy, quiet dignity. He didn't turn on the big overhead light. He just clicked on a small desk lamp that threw long shadows across the kitchen table. "I've been waiting for this day for years, Olivia," he said. He moved to the small pantry, but he didn't grab food. He pulled a loose floorboard away from the base of the shelving. From the dark space beneath, he hauled out a heavy, fireproof lockbox. He sat down across from me and poured 2 cups of tea. He didn't speak until I'd taken a sip. Then he opened the box. Inside were stacks of yellowed paper, ledger sheets from the old days, bank statements with handwritten annotations, and printed emails that had been deleted from the company's server years ago. Marcus slid a folder toward me. It was labeled Project Ghost. "Your father was a brilliant designer, but he trusted blood," Marcus said. "When he got sick, he signed over temporary management to Gerald. He thought he was protecting you, but Catherine and Gerald didn't see a legacy to protect. They saw a bank account to drain." I looked at the first report. It was a shadow financial statement. It didn't take a genius to see the discrepancy. According to the public records I'd seen, the company had been struggling for years. But these reports showed a different story. "They spent 3 years illegally diluting your shares," Marcus explained, his finger tracing a line of numbers. "They created a series of emergency capital calls that you, as a minor, couldn't respond to. Every time they saved the company with their own money, they took more of your equity. By the time you turned 18, you went from owning 40% to barely 5%. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. That's why they keep calling me a junior designer. They needed me to believe I had no power so I wouldn't ask to see the books." "It gets worse," Marcus said. He pulled out a second stack of documents. These were recent, dated within the last 18 months. "They aren't just siphoning equity anymore, they're siphoning cash. They've been routing money through 3 shell companies registered to Catherine's maiden name to consult on projects like the one you just finished." I leaned in, my breath hitching. "How much, Marcus?" "Over the last 6 years." "Exactly $658,000, he said. That number hit me like a physical blow. That was the exact amount Catherine had threatened to sue me for at the bistro. They weren't just stealing. They were using the exact amount of their theft as a weapon to bankrupt me. They wanted to take my remaining shares to cover the hole they had dug themselves." "I have the wire transfers," Marcus said. "I have the original articles of incorporation your father signed." And I have the proof that the restructuring they did after the funeral was forged. I looked at the old man. His hands were steady now. He wasn't the slouching accountant from the office anymore. He was a man holding a match, waiting for me to decide if we were going to start a fire. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I whispered. "I had to wait until you were ready to leave," he said simply. "If I told you while you still wanted their love, you would have confessed to them. And then we both would have disappeared. You had to see the monster for yourself." I looked at the shadow reports. This wasn't just a family drama, it was a crime. For the first time in 10 years, the weight on my chest didn't feel like grief. It felt like steel. "I have backup now," I said, more to myself than to him. "You have the truth," Marcus corrected. "Now we just need to make sure everyone else sees it." I spent the next 4 nights in a state of hyper-focused silence. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't answer the increasingly frantic texts from my uncle asking why I wasn't at my basement desk to fix the errors on the Horizon project. I stayed in my apartment with the curtains drawn, my father's silver-capped fountain pen sitting on the desk next to my laptop like a talisman. Marcus had given me the physical files, but I needed them to be undeniable. I needed a digital trail that couldn't be shredded or deleted by an administrator. I started by digitizing everything. Every yellowed ledger, every secret bank statement, and every wire transfer record from the shell companies, Sterling Strategic, Blue Oak Consulting, and G&C Holdings. Those were the 3 names Catherine had used to bleed the company dry. As I scanned the documents, the pattern became even clearer. Every time my father's health had dipped, a new consulting fee of $25,000 or $50,000 would exit the main account and land in an account controlled by Catherine's sister. It was methodical. It was greedy. And it was all right there in black and white. I cross-checked every transaction with the official bank statements Marcus had managed to save before the system upgrade 2 years ago. I built a spreadsheet that mapped the theft alongside the company's supposed losses. It was a map of a decade-long betrayal. By the 3rd night, my eyes were raw and my head was pounding. I reached the final folder, the original articles of incorporation. I looked at the signature line. My father's handwriting was bold and clear. Below it was the section detailing the trust for his sole heir. The document stated that my shares were to be held in an untouchable trust until I reached the age of 25, not managed at the discretion of Gerald and Catherine. They hadn't just diluted my shares, they had violated a legal trust. They had bypassed the law the moment the dirt hit his casket. I sat there for a long time, the cursor hovering over the copy button on my external drive. A small, weak part of me, the girl who still wanted her aunt to hug her, the girl who wanted her uncle to be the man he pretended to be, hesitated. If I did this, the family name would be dragged through the mud. The firm might not survive the scandal. Maybe I should just take what I had, go to them privately, and ask for a settlement. Maybe I could just leave with enough to start over and let them keep their secrets. I looked at the silver pen. I remembered the basement office. I remembered Catherine's laugh at the banquet when she told the room I was erratic. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about the $658,000. It was about the truth. If I didn't do this, they would keep doing it to the next designer, the next employee, and the next person who trusted them. They weren't protecting a legacy, they were wearing it like a stolen coat. I clicked the button. The progress bar moved slowly, copying 452 files. I watched the files transfer onto the silver flash drive. It was small, no bigger than a stick of gum, but it held the weight of 10 years of lies. I checked it twice to make sure everything was there: the forged signatures, the shell company registrations, and the diverted Horizon bonuses. I marked the next Tuesday in red on my calendar. That was the day of our meeting at the bistro. I wasn't going there to surrender. I was going there to finish the job my father started. Tuesday morning arrived with a sky the color of a dull nickel. I woke up at 5:00 a.m., though I hadn't really slept. I sat at my small kitchen table and watched the light slowly crawl across the floor. I didn't feel the frantic, shaky anxiety I'd felt for the last decade. I felt heavy, like a mountain that had finally decided where it was going to settle. I checked my phone. There was a text from Aunt Catherine sent at 8:15 a.m., lunch at 1:00 p.m. Bring a pen to sign the documents. Let's finish this like adults, Olivia. Don't be difficult. She was already celebrating. I could hear the triumph in the text, the casual dismissal of me as a difficult child who just needed to be brought to heel. She truly believed that by threatening me with a $658,000 lawsuit, she had found the ultimate leash. She thought I was coming to the bistro to beg for mercy and sign away the last of my father's soul. I spent the morning in final preparation. I didn't call a lawyer, not yet. I called Marcus one last time. "Are you sure about this, Olivia?" he asked. His voice sounded thin over the line. "Once you put that drive on the table, there's no going back to the way things were. They'll be ruined. The company name will be tainted." "The company name is already tainted, Marcus," I said, looking at the silver flash drive resting in my palm. "They're the ones who did it. I'm just the one turning on the lights." "I'll be nearby," he promised. "I have the physical originals in my car. If they try to claim the digital files are fakes, I'll walk in." "I don't think they'll get that far," I said. I got dressed with a deliberate, slow care. I chose a navy suit I'd bought with my first real paycheck, a paycheck they had tried to claw back. I put on my father's watch. Finally, I tucked the silver flash drive into my inner jacket pocket and slid the silver-capped fountain pen into my bag. I arrived at the bistro 10 minutes early. I wanted to be the one already seated. I wanted them to have to walk into my space. I chose a table in the center of the room, right under the main chandelier. I wanted the light to be bright. I wanted witnesses, even if they didn't know what they were witnessing. At 1:05 p.m., the glass door pushed open. Catherine walked in first, wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my car. She looked radiant, her face set in a mask of concerned maternal authority. Gerald trailed behind her, looking small and slightly uncomfortable, as he always did when Catherine was about to do the dirty work. He was carrying the thick legal folder, clutching it to his chest like a shield. They spotted me and walked over. Catherine didn't sit immediately. She stood over me for a second, her shadow falling across my menu. "You look tired, Olivia," she said, her voice loud enough for the table next to us to hear. "I'm glad you're finally taking this seriously. It's time to put this family drama behind us so you can get the help you clearly need." She sat down and signaled the waiter for a bottle of sparkling water. She didn't ask what I wanted. She just looked at Gerald and nodded. Gerald cleared his throat and slid the folder across the white linen. "It's all here, Olivia. The surrender of the remaining shares in exchange for us dropping the misappropriation suit. It's a very generous offer, considering the damage your recent behavior has caused the firm." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. He clicked it and set it on top of the folder. "Let's just get this over with." I looked at the folder. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Catherine. She was leaning back, a tiny, satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She was 100% certain she had won. She thought she was the one holding the leverage. I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out the silver flash drive. I set it down on the table between us. The silver casing caught the overhead light, gleaming against the white cloth. "I'm not signing that, Gerald," I said. My voice was calm. It was the loudest thing in the room. Catherine's smirk didn't vanish, it just sharpened. "Olivia, don't be a fool. We told you what would happen. If you don't sign, we file the suit by 5:00 p.m. You'll be bankrupt before the month is over." You should look at what's on this drive first, I said. Because by 5:00 p.m., I won't be the one worrying about an audit. I took a deep breath, pushed the glass door of the restaurant's reality open in my mind, and listened to the jazz music play one last time before the silence. The jazz music didn't stop, but the world inside our booth went cold. Catherine didn't reach for the flash drive. She stared at it like it was a poisonous insect that had landed on her expensive lunch. What is this, Olivia? Her voice was a low, dangerous vibration. More creative projects. I told you the time for games is over. It's not a game, Catherine, I said. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. It's every wire transfer to Sterling Strategic and Blue Oak Consulting over the last 6 years. It's the original articles of incorporation, the ones where my father protected my shares in a trust you weren't allowed to touch. And it's the $658,000 you've siphoned out of the company to pay for those consulting fees. The color drained from Uncle Gerald's face so fast it was like a physical transformation. He looked gray. He let go of the legal folder and it slumped onto the table. How did you? Gerald stammered. Marcus, I said. Catherine's eyes widened. For a split second, the mask of the sophisticated CEO slipped, and I saw the panicked predator underneath. That old man is senile. No one will believe a word from a disgruntled bookkeeper. He's not just a bookkeeper, I said, raising my voice just enough to carry to the next table. The waiter with the water pitcher froze. The couple to our left slowed their chewing. He was my father's witness. And these documents aren't just memories, Catherine. They're forensic. Every shell company is registered in your sister's name. Every transfer has your digital signature. I tapped the flash drive. I've already sent encrypted copies to the IRS whistleblower portal and the firm's external auditors. If you file that lawsuit against me at 5:00 p.m., the auditors will be through your doors by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. You wouldn't, Catherine hissed. She lunged across the table, her hand clawing for the drive, but I was faster. I pulled it back, holding it out of her reach. I already have, I said. The restaurant was quiet now. The jazz was still playing, but the 40 people in the room were no longer eating. They were watching. They were seeing the great Catherine Sterling, the pillar of the business community, reduced to a snarling woman reaching across a bistro table. Gerald, do something, Catherine barked, turning to her husband. But Gerald wasn't moving. He was staring at the name Blue Oak Consulting on the drive's label. His lip was trembling. The shell companies. Catherine, you told me there were no traces left. You said you'd cleared the old server logs when we moved her to the basement. The room let out a collective, sharp breath. Gerald realized what he just said a second too late. He looked around the room, seeing the eyes of the strangers, the frozen waiter, and finally me. He looked at his wife with a genuine horror, realizing her greed hadn't just secured their future, it had destroyed it. You idiot, Catherine whispered, her face turning a mottled red. I didn't know about the trust, Gerald said, his voice cracking as he physically pushed his chair back, moving away from her. He dropped his silk napkin on the floor. I didn't know you forged the signature on the restructuring. You told me it was legal. You said we were saving the company. We were saving ourselves, she snapped, losing all pretense of dignity. I'm done, Gerald whispered. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He just stood up and walked toward the exit, leaving his coat, his folder, and his wife behind. Catherine sat there, alone at the table. The red blotches on her face were dark now. She looked at the folder of legal threats she'd brought to ruin me, then back at me. I stood up, tucked the flash drive into my pocket, and picked up my bag. The $658,000 isn't what I owe you, I said, looking down at her. It's what you owe the company. And I think the authorities are going to be very interested in how you plan to pay it back. I turned around and walked toward the door. I didn't look back to see her expression. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of the room shifting behind me, the silence of 40 people who had just watched a decade of lies shatter in real time. I pushed through the glass door, stepped onto the sidewalk, and took the first breath of air that didn't taste like their secrets. The sun hits the glass front of my new office around 8:30 every morning. It's a small space, much smaller than the corner offices on the third floor of Sterling and Associates, but the air here is different. It's clear. There are no heavy silences or whispered threats echoing in the hallways. On the frosted glass of the door, the name is simple: Olivia Sterling Design. The fallout from the bistro wasn't a single explosion. It was a slow, agonizing crumble for Catherine and Gerald. Once the audit began, the shell companies collapsed like a house of cards. The IRS doesn't care about family loyalty, and the board of directors cared even less. They were both removed from the firm within the month. Gerald is currently living in a small apartment 2 towns over, having traded his mahogany desk for a life of legal depositions. Catherine is facing federal charges for embezzlement and tax evasion. I don't go to the hearings. I don't need to see her face to know the truth. I didn't take over the old company. I didn't want the ghosts. I let the liquidators handle the remains of Sterling and Associates and used my recovered trust, the money they hadn't managed to spend yet, to open this agency. Marcus sits in the office next to mine. He's my chief financial officer now, though mostly he's just the man who makes sure the coffee is actually hazelnut and that no one ever dilutes a single share of our integrity. We don't have 40 employees. We have 6. And every one of them knows exactly where the company stands every Friday afternoon. I sat at my desk this morning, looking over a new contract for a local nonprofit. I reached into my bag and pulled out the silver-capped fountain pen. It gleamed in the Tennessee sunlight, looking just as solid and uncompromising as it did when my father held it. I've stopped looking for permission to exist. I've stopped trying to earn a seat at a table that was built to keep me out. I signed the contract. The ink was dark, bold, and final. What would you do? Would you hand over the flash drive to the authorities anonymously and walk away? Or would you first look into the eyes of those who stole your legacy and let them see the moment their world ended? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you would handle a betrayal like this. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me share more stories like this one. And if you're looking for another deep dive into family secrets, check out my next story about a girl whose mother forged a DNA test for a massive inheritance, only for a stranger at a funeral to reveal the truth. Take care of yourselves.